Akarja Folcha, welcome to today's talk with David McWilliams, which is part of this year's special online virtual Féile, brought to you by Féile on Phobail in partnership with St Mary's University College and the Irish News. My name is Martina Devlin. I'm your host. More importantly, I'm in conversation with the one and only David McWilliams. David has an economics column with the Irish Times and writes regularly on the same subject for the Financial Times. He's been ranked the 10th most influential economist in the world. His weekly podcast is the second most listened to economics podcast in the world, and he's written 5 bestsellers on his specialist subject. He hosts 2 festivals, Kilconomics and the Dalkey Book Festival, and runs the latter with an exceptional woman who happens to be his wife, Sian Smith. Sian, of course, is originally from Belfast. So, David, apart from your excellent taste in women...
How are you, Martina?
I'm
good to see you. Good to see you.
Listen, today's starter for 10 is the all-island economy.
Yeah.
Will Brexit make unification more or less likely?
Martina, much more likely. Before we kick off, I'll just say I'm delighted and really honoured to be asked to talk at Féile. It's something I've wanted to go to for a number of years. And
You've never been?
Yeah, and we'll do it. We'll next time, you know.
Well, I have to tell you, this is the 32nd consecutive Féile, and nothing has stopped it. So the committee decided, why could a pandemic be allowed to stop?
You're absolutely right. No, I think it's something that as you know, I know Belfast well, and it's something I've really wanted to go to, and it was really sparked by a talk I gave in St Mary's College last Christmas, and the difference between the discussion we were having in Belfast and the ones that we would normally have in Dublin, for me, was really, really revealing. It was an incredibly energetic audience. I was with a guy from BBC called William Crawley, who's
an excellent broadcaster.
Yeah. And we were riffing about this topic, but lots and lots of other things, and it was really fascinating. And as you know, my connection to Belfast is through, as you said, Sian, and I'd really love to go. So maybe this time next year we'll go in the flesh. Regarding Brexit, I think it's undoubtedly the case, Martina, that Brexit has accelerated momentum in the United Kingdom, which is kind of unstoppable now. I saw Boris Johnson in Scotland not too long ago, in the last couple of days, and it's very clear to me that while we're not too sure what Johnson will be remembered for, one of those things could be the breaking up of the United Kingdom. And the reason is the following. We know that Brexit is an English nationalist project. And as an English nationalist project, it is very, very clearly exclusionary. We see the dynamic in Scotland, not just in how Nicola Sturgeon has performed in COVID, which is more or less a messaging issue. It wasn't actually, the actual data between Scotland and England isn't so different, but it's a messaging issue. And I think a lot of Scots are saying, and you see this in the polls, that, look, if we can trust Nicola Sturgeon with our health, we may well trust her with our wealth and our future. So I think that Brexit has clearly accelerated momentums on the far side of the water for political reconfiguration. That may well lead to the independence of Scotland. And then suddenly a whole totally different dynamic is in play with respect to Ireland.
The independence of Scotland before any change to constitution?
I think so. I think unusually Scotland will lead Ireland in this regard, which is an unusual development in the history of these islands. Normally Scotland has been much more attuned to Westminster, but I don't think this time around. But I mean, what I've really quite like doing is thinking about the future in the following way, Martina. Consider the future as being part of our story. And I'm not talking about the reunification or the unification of Ireland in the very immediate future, but let's look at the way that the world is panning out. And as you mentioned, my wife's from Belfast. My children were born in Dundonald in the Ulster Hospital. My daughter was born 20 years ago, more or less this summer, in the Dundonald Hospital. And sometimes when I'm thinking about the future, I think about her. But you can think about it. You can think about your niece, your nephew, any child that you know, and imagine that kid when they're 90. So I sometimes think of Lucy's 90th birthday. Okay.
Do you plan to be there for it?
I don't think I will be knocking around. But just imagine then her grandchildren when she's 90. Those children, which are directly related to us, whether they're nieces or nephews or friends or whatever, will be living in the 22nd century, maybe even the 23rd century, that child, okay? So our relationship with the future is familial. It is real. We're talking about people that we may well meet, and certainly our friends' children and our children will meet, okay? So you've got to look at what will Ireland look like. So forget just Brexit. Brexit is simply an iteration on the roadmap, okay? But the roadmap is very, very clear to me, and it's defined, and we'll come back to Brexit in a second, Martin, but it's defined by three big factors. One is demographics, the demographics in Northern Ireland. Not the demographics as exist now, Martina, but the demographics as exist in the kids who are 10 years old in Northern Ireland, okay? That's the first thing, okay? The second thing is the understanding that economically, partition has been a total disaster for everyone in the northeast of the country. Everyone, nationalists, unionists, whatever tribe you decide that to hang your colours on. It's been an economic disaster.
Why would you say that? Not everybody would agree with that. You know, people feel an allegiance to Britain.
Well, the evidence is overwhelming. In fact, it's overwhelming for all centralised regions of the British state, Scotland, Wales, etc. Basically, what you've seen is the over-centralisation of the UK in London has led to the gradual erosion and then quite rapid erosion of the economic competences of the regions, whether it's Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. Okay, and take, for example, I'm doing something very interesting with the history of rubber at the moment. A guy called John Dunlop from County Down, from Downpatrick, discovered the rubber tube in the 1880s. And there's a very interesting link to Roger Casement, which I'll talk to you about in a second, right? But
the Congo.
Yeah, exactly. So the Congo was basically an economic factory run by the Belgians to produce rubber. Dunlop discovered the magic of rubber, making the Belgians figure out where are we going to make this. And Casement was the man who exposed. Now, the interesting thing is Casement and Dunlop's families are buried up right beside each other in Dean's Grange Cemetery beside me. So this is a little story I'm working on. But let's come back to the northeast of Ireland in the late 19th century. Extraordinarily innovative place. Almost like the Silicon Valley of Europe. Huge innovation.
At the time of partition, the North was a powerhouse.
This is my point.
It was the agricultural republic was going to drag it down.
Exactly. So this is my point. So at the time of partition, so we take the late 19th century, early 20th century, that part of Ireland, the northeast of Ireland, was by far the wealthiest, by far the most innovative, by far the only industrial power. In fact, the southern economy we could describe as a beer and biscuits economy, that the only industry we had was the off products of agriculture, biscuits from Jacobs and beer from Guinness's. There was no other industry here. So had you placed a bet 100 years ago on the day of partition, your bet would have said the following: the northern economy would continue to be a small microcosm of modernity. The southern economy would languish as almost, as you said, an agricultural economy, but an economy that bled its people because of a lack of capital. And those people would have to emigrate. And that was the story from the famine on. And in fact, that was the story up until the 1970s. The southern economy was backward, okay? But the interesting thing, the southern economy turned around.
Is that joining the EU, the EEC?
I think it's a combination of more than just the EU. I think it's a combination of many things. I think that what happened was, take the 1950s, we were marking the passing of Jack Charlton there the other week, right? The football team that Jack Charlton created, think about who they were. They were the sons of Irish migrants who left in the 1950s, 500,000 Irish people left the island to live in England alone in the 1950s. So that's not about who went to Canada, who went to America, to England.
My mother was one of them.
There you go. Your mother was one of them. And my parents were supposed to go to Canada. My parents had a ticket to Canada. My mum had a job in Canada. My dad was, they were thinking I would have ended up being a French speaker. They were going to go to Montreal. I would have ended up being a French Canadian, which is a bizarre turn of events. But my sense is the team that Jack Charlton built were the echoes of economic failure. Okay? Right? They were Irish people, Irish blood, but as Morrissey said, English hearts, okay? And they came and played for us, right? So that was our story. The North, think about the North, right? The North now is an economic backwater in comparison to the South, okay? On every single metric, not just on income, not just in innovation, not just in startups, not just every single metric, okay? And the reason I believe is partition. And because partition robbed the North of its normal hinterland, first of all, number one. And number two, it created a dependency culture, which is very, very evident in the way in which Northern Ireland runs its economy. Far too
unsuccessful for the first decades of partition. It only became
It was successful. It was successful. It's quite an interesting thing. Northern Ireland could pay for itself in the British Exchequer until the 1940s.
Okay.
Right? It actually had a surplus. So that's quite interesting. So there was a surplus of cash going from Northern Ireland to London up until the 1940s. Akin with the rest of the United Kingdom after the Second World War, I don't know who it was, Britain's an empire looking for a future, or it's forgotten its empire, doesn't know its place. The Northern Irish economy has, like the rest of the British economy, absent London, the British economy is very backward. And I mean that you can engage that in a variety of ways in terms of trade, what it makes, what it doesn't make, etc. So Northern Ireland suffered profoundly by not having its own autonomy. That's the key. So what actually happens in economics is if you have a bond market, Martina, if you have to go out and raise money on your own, with your own flag, with your own risk premium as a country, you mature very quickly, okay? Because you have to get your house in order.
Skin in the game.
Precisely. So if you don't have that, if you're a dependent, if you're like a concubine economy, okay, right? You don't need to actually get up in the morning and say, what are we going to do today, right? So consequently, politics and economics in the North has been diminished to simply a game of who can extract more money out of the exchequer, right? Now, what that does is over 2 or 3 generations, in the first generation or two, that's fine, because it's an easy life. But what actually happens is the rest of the world is moving on, Martina. Nobody's waiting for Northern Ireland to wake up. And the same way in Britain. Nobody's waiting for Brexit. Nobody cares. I traveled before COVID a lot, giving speeches. Brexit is very, very low on the rest of the world's list of priorities. It's kind of it's like an idiosyncratic, almost slightly British weirdness. And I'm not talking about France and Germany. I'm talking about when you go to the English-speaking world, you go to Canada, America, South Africa, Australia. It's like, yeah, get on with it, man. It's not our deal, right? So the world is not waiting for any country. Every country has to figure out how they play the game of competitive economics in a globalized world, okay? The Republic of Ireland, because we had our backs against the wall, because we had no capital, because nobody would lend money to us, we had to think, okay, what are we going to do? How do we leapfrog this backwardness into the future? And what we did was join the European Union, and committedly. And I talk as somebody who worked as an economist in the Central Bank of Ireland. I had a few proper jobs years ago, Martina, before we started this other existence. But we'd go and I went to various meetings with the governor. We'd go, and Ireland it was a commitment on the part of the civil servants that this was important to us. Now I was very young; I was only the bag carrier, and it's because I'd gone to university doing a postgrad in Belgium that I could actually speak foreign languages, which was unusual in Ireland at the time in the early 90s. So I went along almost as like the government said, what are they saying? What are those Germans saying? What are those French saying? Anyway, the point was we were committed. But the main difference, I believe, was the presence of American multinationals, our openness to the United States, which was part of an economic strategy, Martina, but also part of a legacy of the diaspora. And I really believe this, that soft power is unbelievably important. It's very hard to put your finger on it, but I remember years ago working for a fellow called Jack Welch. Now, Jack Welch was the sort of legendary chief executive of GE, kind of an arch hyper-capitalist, the guy who came up with, I think, pretty unpleasant ideas like shareholder value and how American corporations should only look at their shareholders. But that being said, Jack Welch's grandparents, with a name like Jack Welch, were from Cork. And I spent a lot of time with him because I was emceeing his European tour for his big autobiography. So I'd sit with him in hotels after we did the gig and we'd chat. And it was incredibly enriching experience for me to be so close to somebody who'd seen so much in the corporate world. Anyway, I asked him about investing in Ireland when General Electric came to invest outside of the United States. And I said, did it matter that your grandparents were from Cork? And he was from Salem, Massachusetts, a very Irish area. And his dad was a bus driver in Salem, Massachusetts. And he looked at me almost aghast. And he said, of course it mattered. Of course it mattered. He said, the minute Ireland opened up, we Americans were ready to put our capital, not on the basis of legacy or heritage, but on the basis of a good economic decision. But softly in the back of our heads was this legacy connection. So I think those two things, the European Union and the Americans, now this is what the British don't understand, is that Ireland has been playing this game for a long time, which is, and all small countries have to figure this out. How do you play off the big countries? How do you be part of the European Union, be attractive to Americans, and be cognizant of the fact that Britain is a significant trade partner? But I'll give you a statistic that shows a diversion of trade. When Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of England, Britain, for the second time in the late 1940s, I think early 1950s. Early 1950s, he got a second.
He kept down by 51, didn't he?
He got a second bite of the cherry, I think, right? Yeah. Irish trade to the Irish exports to Britain were 92% of our exports, 93% of our exports went to the UK. Today, it's 11%. So just think about the change in the economy. The Irish economy was hyper-dependent on Britain in the 50s. In the Brexiteer epoch that they keep going back to, right? And they still think of the 1950s, right? Okay, as some sort of great beer and warm beer and crickety, yeah, all that carry on, right? All that malarkey, and it's only malarkey, right? 9 out of 10 Irish exports went to Britain. Now 1 out of 10 Irish exports go to Britain. Okay, so our economy has changed dramatically. So in a way, and this goes back to Northern Ireland, Britain has remained static. It hasn't dealt with the world as an economic entity. If you take London out of the equation, the financial markets, rock and roll, advertising, maybe the Premier League is another big British brand, right? If you take those out, what you're talking about is a country that has gone backward economically. And unfortunately, Northern Ireland, as an umbilical link to Britain, has been dragged back. So, for example, when I was a kid, Martina, you'll remember this, I remember going to play a rugby match for the school I was going to, secondary school, in Campbell College, and I'd never been in the North before, okay? And it was in the early 1980s, a little schoolboy team. And we went across the border, and going across the border was like going into a modern country. The roads were better, the cars were better, the sweets were better. I remember everything looked really different, okay? I was thinking, man, this is all cool. And of course, now, when my in-laws have a caravan, which is, I've noticed, is a very northern thing to have, is a caravan, and they come down the south, and they come to Athlone all the time. They come down from Belfast, they come down, and they're always saying, you know, the roads are better, the cars are better, the standard of living is better. So what we've seen in our lifetime, Martina, is a shift in terms of lifestyle and living standards and whatever, right? And so my sense is that the opportunity for Northern Ireland in the context of a united island economy, okay, are enormous. If you think about income per head, for example, at the moment, the income per head in Northern Ireland is about 24,000 euros per year. Mm-hmm. And in the Republic, it's 40,000 euros a year. And that's not on GDP, that's something called GNI, which strips out all these distortions. So,
okay, but David, just before you move on from that, it's not just income, it's about disposable income. So are there supports perhaps in the north? I'm thinking of the NHS, for example, the education system, not at university level, but up until that, where perhaps people in the north are better off?
I think if you regard the health service as the barometer I think if you regard free access to health for everybody as the barometer, then it's better to live in Northern Ireland if you're sick and old, okay, and poor. Okay, so take those things. If you're sick and old and poor, right? But the vast majority of society are not sick and old, and actual fact and poor and dependent. Right? I think the NHS suffers quite dramatically. I think there's a lot of propaganda about the NHS. If you look at when I listen to people clapping for the NHS, right, and the idea that the NHS is by far and away the best health service in the world, there's very little evidence of that. So I'll tell you, for example, my mother-in-law is waiting for a steroid injection. She's 83. She's waiting for a steroid injection into her hip, okay, because she's got arthritis in East Belfast, right? She's been waiting for months. That doesn't happen in the south. My sense.
Could you pay to jump the queue?
Because people don't pay to jump the queue. People pay insurance, like the Germans. The idea of health insurance is totally normal. There's a myth abroad, okay, that paying health insurance is abnormal. In fact, it's the way the vast majority of European health systems work. The NHS is an outlier. So in the NHS, you all wait together. That's not necessarily my sense, right? If you look at, for example, unemployment benefit in the north, right, vis-a-vis the south, the dole in the south is €185 a week. In the north, it's about £58. I mean, it's, to be poor in the north is a disaster in comparison to the south, okay? The southern welfare state is much more generous, much more generous, and has been for a long time. So this idea that, in fact, there's a nasty, red and tooth and claw capitalist country in the south that doesn't look after its people, just try being unemployed in either jurisdictions, okay? So my sense is that, and the reason is because the welfare state of a country has to reflect the income of the country. And if you can generate decent incomes and generate decent wealth, and you and I live down here, Martina, so we know what's going on. This is not a Panglossian world. But what you do understand is that on most metrics, living in the Republic of Ireland provides you with better opportunity, okay? That's the first thing. Now, let's see what happens after COVID. COVID is a big issue. And it's going to be hard to recover, and let's see how that recovery goes, okay? But if you look at these three big things, one is that partition. At partition, the north was twice as rich as the south. It's now twice as poor, okay? Number one. The north had dynamic, outward-looking companies that traded all over the world. It now has very few, okay? The south has managed to bring capital in, and that capital is fused and driven together an economy that is, I would say, one of the more interesting economic test cases that we've seen in many years. Even the education system in the north is very unusual because the north has the most spectacular results and the most spectacular failures in the UK. So if you're good in the north, you do extremely well, okay? But if you're bad in the north, if you're actually falling behind, you fall behind profoundly. So it's actually an extreme outcome for an education system. But let's think about the opportunity. Imagine that the north now was a bit like the south in about 1992, 93, in terms of the economy. So the question is, what is the best roadmap for Northern Ireland? It strikes me is becoming much more akin to ourselves, much more like ourselves. And if that involves reunification politically, or even just movements towards a united Ireland economically, I think the north has everything to gain and almost zero to lose, almost zero to lose. And if you take your observation about Brexit, if the dynamic of British politics is profoundly derailed by Scottish nationalism, okay, then the union of Britain, Wales, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland looks very unusual. It looks like an anomaly. And I'll give you one statistic in terms of demographics. There are now more immigrants on the island of Ireland than there are unionists. Okay? Now think about that. Okay?
On the island?
Yes, there are more foreign-born people on this island than there are people who profess to be unionists. Now consider that, right? And consider in the next 10 or 15 years that this island economy will become an island economy of maybe close to 7.5, 8 million people. It becomes substantial. And in terms of innovation and wealth and economics, that island economy, if you look at even the British context, in terms of wealth, will be the second richest region in what would have been Britain after the inner M25 region, okay? Miles ahead of the northern powerhouse they talk about, Manchester and Leeds and all that carry on, right? Birmingham, okay? So these are the facts. These are the facts on the ground, okay? The facts on the ground demand us to reconsider how this country operates. And as I said at the very start, looking out at let's say my daughter's 90th birthday, think about that. And her looking at her granddaughter, if that happens, will be a citizen of the 23rd century. So we're very close, right? It's very, very close, right? And therefore, you look at the demographics, you look at the economics, you look at the wealth disparity. And when we were younger, Martina, do you remember this big thing with the South can't afford the North? Remember that was the big thing?
You still hear that today.
You hear it, but it's probably not true.
Tell me why.
Because the Southern economy is an economy of about 300 billion euros. The Northern economy is 50 billion. Okay, so that's the disparity. The Southern economy is about 6 times greater.
So it could absorb.
So even if you think of the subvention that we hear a lot about, I think it's about 11 billion euros a year.
It's a disputed figure, though, isn't it, David? Because it doesn't include things like paying for the House of Windsor, paying for Pershing missiles, and so forth. Well,
I don't think United Ireland will be paying for any Pershing missiles now. Or the House of Windsor. There's a better chance to pay for the House of Windsor. We don't have to pay for them. Who cares? Give them a few quid. I don't give a damn, right? If that's the price, who gives a damn? Let them flounce around in their kilts and whatever, right? Now, but my point is, let's say the subvention is 11 billion. Okay? That's about 4% of Irish GDP at the moment, right? Less. We're spending 30 billion on bloody COVID at the bat of an eye. It's no big deal. It's not a lot. And I think there could be internal economic dynamics that could, certainly, like if you take, for example, Northern Irish wages are lower than the South, okay?
But so all the wages would have to go up to the same level, not
or there would be some sort of fusion in the middle. Take about rents, okay? I mean, the amazing thing is the cost of housing in the North is so much more affordable than the South, right? If you have a unified economy with a good broadband system, think about this, right? And a decent rail and road network, Ireland becomes very small. It's very feasible to live in the country. I mean, this idea, like when I first went to Belfast, you love this, was when Lucy was about to be born and Shan was said, look, we're going to have the baby up in the north. And I thought, yeah.
Why did she want that so much?
Because I think her mum was, her mum worked in the Ulster Hospital, and I think she wanted to be beside her mum. I think that was what she wanted to do. But I thought this was all, whatever. And we drove when Shan was in labour. Think about this. From Dublin to Belfast, okay? There was no motorway around Balbriggan. There was no motorway around Drogheda, Dundalk, right? Okay? And at Newry, it was this little makeshifty thing. Do you remember? Remember that little thing? Yeah. So that was not that long ago. And the journey from Belfast to Dublin, we did make it, by the way, obviously, but the journey from Belfast was like a 3.5-hour schlep. Yeah. It's now 2 hours. You know, and if we could build a proper enterprise bloody train along French lines, if we had a TGV, you know the French TGV, right? And I always imagine this because the French TGV would cut, think about this, it's amazing. The train time from Belfast to Dublin would be 28 minutes at the highest speed. Now that shows you that, you know, this idea that we're not living in, Canada. We're living in a tiny little island, all together, off the coast of Europe, off the coast of Britain, which is off the coast of Europe, right? And my sense is that over the next 5-10 years, the inconsistency, the economic inconsistency of Brexit, okay? The economic inconsistency of Britain feeling that it can get trade deals with countries that don't want to do trade deals with it, that it can turn itself, into little Singapore. I mean, if there is a Singapore in Europe, it's Ireland. It's not Britain, right?
David, you said something that made me slightly anxious. Just before your daughter was born, I'm going back to...
I hope so.
Going back 20 years here. No, not that far. When you talked about wages and balancing, it's probably not making the idea of reunification very attractive to people in the Republic to say, you know what, some workers will have lower wages.
Or some houses will have lower prices. Look at it in a different way, right? So it's about the prices in the economy. So what happens in the economy if it expands, okay? And it expands into an area, for example, which is less developed, okay? What tends typically to happen is prices and lots of things come down, okay? Because the capacity is expanded. So for example, if you take, I would say, all food prices would fall. Not dramatically, but down to a level. Of course, what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to subvent a lot of public sector wages in the north, okay? And they'll have to come up a wee bit. But these things, you can't sell people the myth that it's all going to be rosy, right? You have to say, look, in reality, what's going to happen like East Germany and West Germany, right? What happened in East Germany and West?
So the biggest upside and the biggest downside.
Yeah, and you've got to, and the great...
What are they?
To have these conversations and have them openly and say, well, this might not work out well, and this might work out well, right? But the evidence of the two jurisdictions, in a way, Ireland has been an extraordinary economic laboratory. So you have two people on the one island, more or less the same people. It's what Freud would call the narcissism of small differences, okay? I remember bringing an Argentinian friend of myself up to Belfast recently, and I think you've met him, Martin Lestow, friend of mine. Yeah. And he was looking at Falls Road and the Shankill, and we took him across Lower Newton Earth Road and la. And his view as an Argentinian was, the differences when you actually take an altitude are quite small, right? And I thought it was a fair point to make. But if you look at the country, if you look at our history, if you look at the economic opportunities, what you have is a laboratory, Martina, right? So Irish people in one jurisdiction do really badly, Irish people in the other jurisdiction do really well. What's the problem? The jurisdiction, not the people. Right? Think about it. Like, this is so obvious to me. It's so self-evident to me. Like, if economists could have run an economic experiment, partition would have been it. Okay? And they would have said, now, here's the same people. One crowd were rich, one crowd were poor. More or less the same people, okay? Right? Differences of culture and religion, but in effect, more or less the same people. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide a little line, and we're going to have one jurisdiction and one way of doing things up here, and one way of doing things down here. And we'll have to see what happens. So for the first 25 years, it's like, oh, okay, more or less accords to the way we thought. The Northeast is still better off. The Southwest, kind of disastrous. But then over decades and decades and decades, you see this is like an experiment. And we end up 100 years after partition with the evidence. And the evidence is overwhelming that the people in the northeast of the country under one jurisdiction have done profoundly worse economically than the people in the other jurisdiction. And you draw your conclusions. And the conclusions have to be that something to do with the jurisdiction, not with the people. You can't blame the people for this. It's got something to do with jurisdiction. So
how do you get that message out to people whose hearts belong to Britain? Who know perhaps, if they look at the data, that they're not doing as well, but who feel British and want to continue.
Well, I mean, as you know, Martina, my mother said once to me, she's during after the Belfast Agreement, she said to me, look, He said, look, I know you like your politics, you like talking about it and whatever, and you like the whole Belfast Agreement or Good Friday Agreement, but you didn't have to marry one of them. So I am the experiment, right? Okay? Our kids are born in Belfast. We are the Good Friday Agreement incarnate, our family, okay? The differences are not huge. This is my point, okay? And I know you can't argue from the specific, right? I don't see this being a big bang idea. I don't see this thing being a one moment demography changes. I don't think the idea of a border poll at the moment I don't think if it goes to 51.1%, okay, if that's the border poll.
It's 50 plus 1%.
50 plus, I know, right. So my own sense is we should think very deeply about this, okay? Second thing is the conversation in Ireland amongst us has to include unionist people. It has to be much less aggressive. It has to be much more understanding. They have to feel wanted. You'll never fall in love with somebody who slags you off. Think about it. We need the people of the northeast of Ireland to fall in love with Ireland. That's the key. You can't coerce a marriage. It can't be an arranged marriage, okay? It has to be a marriage of love, a marriage of affection, a marriage of understanding, okay? And that's why I talk about the long, long road, right? Right? I can give you all the figures you want, okay? I can tell you exactly what's going on. I can explain what's going on. We know in our gut what's going on economically, right? We all know that. But that never, ever goes into the back of the head of the Linfield supporter going across from Larne to Stranraer to watch Rangers, okay? Right? These are the people that we have to talk to. There's no point us talking to ourselves, right? That conversation's over. And it's really a conversation that's easy, right? So as somebody who's married into the FARC, the other tribe, okay, what we need is we need to get to know each other. We need to know them. We need to listen to them. Late at night, when my family are unburdening themselves of their angst, and they're very anxious. They're very, very anxious. They're very trapped. All this sort of, what I would sort of chest out displays of British nationalism in Northern Ireland, okay? 12th of July, all that sort of stuff. All that rage is simply the flip side of hopelessness. That's why you are enraged. You get angry because you've no hope, because somebody hasn't given you a pathway. There hasn't been a de Klerk moment for Northern Unionists, where de Klerk comes in and says, listen, guys, this is the way it's going to go, right? But that will only happen if we, the majority of Irish people, begin the process of getting to know our neighbors. And I know this is maybe my life's mission. Nobody ever told me when I was brought up in Dunleary that I would, but it's a fact of life. You end up marrying into a different tribe and you get to know them. And you get to know that, we are the ones who need to be generous because we are the ones that control the future, right? And if you control the future and if you have more and more of the cards are in your top pocket, it behoves us, and I know it's very difficult, and I'm really conscious of the fact that I'm talking at Féile, okay, and I really am, and Dunleary is a different place to Andersonstown in terms of experience, okay, and in terms of what we've all come through. However,
the Troubles weren't relevant in Dunleary.
Say that again?
The Troubles weren't relevant in Dunleary.
What wasn't relevant?
The Troubles. You remember those 30 years of
I didn't, yeah. But they were relevant. They were relevant because the Troubles destroyed I think the economy here would have taken off in the 70s, not in the 90s. I really do.
Yeah.
It's very hard to attract in capital when a armed group are kidnapping chief executives of Dutch multinationals. Let's cut to the fucking chase, right? That does not a good economy make, right? Now, so you've got to drop all that stuff, right? And that, because that is not, the reason countries become magnets for capital and allow that capital to enrich their people. And there's warts and all in this, and we know that, Martina, we can talk about taxes and what we should do and shouldn't do, but that general idea, the place
stable society.
The place has to be stable, right? And if you have fellas running around with guns, kidnapping foreign chief executives, it doesn't work, right? So the Troubles was relevant to us, but not like to you, right? But let's go to the other side. You know, when I talk to members of the unionist community, and I probably do it more than most, certainly more than most Dubliners, okay? What I detect is fear, anxiety. I detect a huge amount of regret about
what?
About not managing Northern Ireland better when they could have done. I hear anger at their own leaders. I hear anger at the fact that they are in a cul-de-sac. So
managing Northern Ireland better, how? Do you mean a fairer society?
Much fairer. I think that they realise that they made a hames of it. People who I know who know their history, who've taken time to understand their history, okay? But equally, I understand that they looked at the South as the enemy. They looked at the border as protection. I had a conversation with a very, very, very sophisticated woman from the North, not that long ago, a friend of friends, and she said, when we were kids, we regarded the border as protection against you. Now that's really interesting, right? That you were aggressing towards us. So that's something you won't hear that in RTE, right? That the border was offering protection to certain people, right? That the British state offered protection. You don't really hear this conversation. So my sense is that we've got to all have that conversation, open it up, don't threaten, and allow the relentless march of demography to take place. And the relentless march of demography is the following, right? If you look at the last census of Northern Ireland, okay, and you look at the various different cohorts. So the census in the UK divides the population in brackets of 5 years. So 0 to 5, 5 to 10, blah, 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 all the way up to beyond 90. If you look at the Northern Irish population of the people who are over 90, so they are the people who were born in the first decade of the Northern Irish state after partition. The split between Catholics and Protestants it's extraordinary. It's almost 70-30. Okay? Think about that, right? If you look at the kids now, under the age of 10, what do they identify as? The Protestant population has halved to 35%. The Catholic population has not doubled, but has gone up to close to 50, right? Now, think about that. So these are the kids who are 10 in Northern Ireland. Project forward another generation after, it's over. The Northern Irish state is over, right? It can't exist with those demographic realities. And the Southern state, as I said to you at the top, has more immigrants in it than there are unionists in the North, right? Now think about this. So the reality of our island is so different to the British-Irish narrative that we're sold all the time. So Martina, I think just take those two things into the gap between that demographic reality and the social reality of a changing island of the country. We need, I believe it behoves us as Irish nationalists, and I'm in the small n, okay, to begin not just a dialogue, but really to begin understanding the angst of the people who live next door. And I think, like, for example, the Southern government, the Republic's government, I don't know what I call the Southern government, the Irish government. I mean, I'm starting to talk like one of you lads. I'm starting to talk like one of you lads. We call them Free Staters next, right? Okay? But the Republic's government knows this. This is not something that is going to come out of the blue. Everyone knows what's going on in the island. And we all know the way it's going. And we've got a choice now. Our generation have got a choice. Do we put our heads in the sand and say it's not happening? Okay. Or do we begin the process of thinking about the future? Now, it's a very interesting, you remember the Citizens' Assembly for the abortion and divorce, or the abortion and the gay marriage,
marriage equality.
Yeah. So what the Citizens' Assembly proved was that the political system was very bad at predicting what the people wanted. Okay? Really, really bad. Okay? Could you imagine having a Citizens' Assembly now for Ireland, except we have, let's say we have 100 people. 50 people represent Ireland today, and we ask 50 people to represent Ireland in 2070. Okay? And what you will find is the Japanese do this in the way they run local government, which is amazing. The people who represent 2070 are much more radical than the people who represent Ireland now. So we want the future to be better. We understand that the future can be better, but we're totally hijacked by the politics of now, by what I call the tyranny of now, right? Okay? So imagine doing this for Northern Ireland, right? For the whole island. We have a citizens' assembly, excuse me, 50 people, or 100, whatever it is, 1,000 people, doesn't matter, right? And those people have to be chosen at random. They can't be professors at Trinity like me and lecturers, yada, 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 right? Punters, right? Okay? 50 represent Ireland now, from every county or every town. Okay? This is what we should do, right? And 50 represent Ireland in the future. And of those 50%, 18% of the 50% will be of the unionist tradition. Okay? Because that's the reality. And you imagine and you plan for that future. And what you will find is the people who represent the future will be much more radical about what to do today than the people who represent the now. And I think those types of assemblies, those types of conversations, those types of understanding would lead to a very interesting outcome. And what you might end up is that citizens' assembly that represents now and the future has quite a different roadmap to what the future looks like than just me sticking my flag here and you sticking your flag there, and we wait until we have more babies, right? That is not a strategy.
But there have been calls for a citizens' assembly to discuss new arrangements on the island of Ireland, just to sit down and discuss it. And the governments aren't interested. And the unionist community is extremely wary of the idea. And the fear is that you'd all be just talking to each other about things you agree on anyhow.
No, I don't think so. I think you're right. That's the fact at the moment. Okay.
Why are governments not getting engaged?
Because governments are endemically short-term in their thinking. If you think of Irish politicians, right, down here, right, you know, they can hardly build a fucking bicycle lane, right? Right? There's a thing called bananaism in politics, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything, right? It's like NIMBYism squared, okay? And that's how our countries run, right? Because everyone's scared of upsetting the other lad, right? Or the other woman, right? So you get this sclerosis. And the default position in sclerosis is to do nothing. But all the time, the society is changing. All the time, the society is going on, doing its own thing, right? People are actually marrying members of the unionist community. Like, we are getting on, right? So my point is that in a way, when things look most hopeless, right now, right? And when we think the positions are entrenched, and when we think it's only, like, for example, if there's only one thing I would do in the North, who's against integrated schooling in the North? Can you tell me?
Catholic Church.
Well, then screw them. Right? Why are they against integrated schooling?
Loss of power.
But they have no power anyway. The power's gone.
They do have some power.
Well, they have very little power down here. So they want to take a long look at down here because that's their future. Okay?
But they control primary school education in the Republic, David.
Yeah,
so
they don't. The last time I saw a priest and nun knocking around a primary school was a long, long time ago.
Well, you know, wait a second. We should clarify that there are very good, hardworking.
I know all that. Look, let's
hierarchy.
There are. I'm just saying, integrated schooling seems to me to be the bedrock of the society that I'm imagining, right? Once you integrate schools, once you realize that my son and his cousin are very similar, okay? Even they're actually born, they're the same age, they're 18, right? They hang out together up in Belfast and Dublin, right? Okay? One of them is going to go to college in Dublin, one of them is going to go to college in Scotland. The kid is going to go to college in Scotland is probably never going to come back to Northern Ireland, right? He's a gorgeous kid, right? Okay?
So it's a loss of talent.
It's a huge loss of talent, right? Now, if you had kids in primary schools going to school together in short order, this would be over. It would be like a Dubs and Culchies thing, right? You know what I mean?
We know that, but it's not happening enough.
So,
the same with integrated housing areas. There have been experiments, and they haven't worked. But perhaps there hasn't been enough support.
That's not the reason not to do them again.
No, I agree, but perhaps there hasn't been enough support for them.
But I mean, my sense is like, sometimes this approach of we can't do this because it's never been done before, okay? There are, you go to Holland, right? Religious wars, we forget that the 30 years war, right, was a sectarian war.
Now, which century are we in?
We forget that we're going back, right? We're going back to the 16th, 17th century, right? Holland was a deeply divided sectarian country, okay? Between Northern Holland, which was Calvinist, and Southern Holland, which was Belgian Catholic, right? Okay, those cultural differences still remain in Holland. But you would never, ever suggest to a Dutchman or a Dutch woman that they wouldn't send their kid to a school because there was a majority of people who once were Calvinists. I mean, it's an anathema. We are an outlier in that regard, right? And what happened is the Dutch government forced them together and said, well, this is the way it's going to be, right?
Sure, but the Irish government has been slow to do that.
Well, I would say Yeah, but I would say that the Irish government needs to be more radical and needs to understand that this is what has to be done.
And what about in Stormont? What about the same?
Well, I mean, I think that money is a very interesting incentive. And if you were to take it away, or if you were to put conditions on it, in fact, what I've always been intrigued about the North is that this subvention is not conditional on other issues.
Okay.
You make the subvention conditional. Say, listen, you want the money, you got to do this. In short order, I think that would change people's minds. And I don't. But again, what I'm saying, Martin, you don't do it today or tomorrow. You say, look, over the next 10 years, we are going to have this plan. Part of this plan is the South is going to work with the North to attract in American investment. So we're going to try and increase the economic abilities or environments of the North.
So the North would have to have a different corporate tax rate to the rest of Britain.
Yeah. But these are all silly things.
Well, Peter Robinson was pushing for that.
Well, Peter Robinson has pushed for a lot more things than people sometimes give him the benefit for. I mean, wasn't he the one who last year at Lenties said, look, we've got to have this conversation?
He did show leadership there. But it's unusual enough for someone who wants to be elected, I guess, to take that leadership role.
So this is where I come back to something different, right? In order to get from the short term to the long term, we need to take some of the competence away from sitting politicians, okay? We need to divorce the day-to-day competence of the political class, and we need to have almost a technocratic class that says this is what we're going to do, but bolstered by this citizens' assembly, which is a deeply democratic. I mean, what we behave in is a thing which I would call spectator democracy, okay? The spectator democracy means that every 4 or 5 years, we all get into the gladiatorial place. We go to the Colosseum, called the vote, and we give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. We're like the emperors, right? To whoever's scrapping in the middle. And they say, no, fancy me, I'll do this. I'm going to be the most beautiful person. I'll be really nice to you. I'll do you this, that, and the other. So we give him or her the thumbs up, right? And then we go back to our world. And that's spectator democracy. We are but spectators in the game. What about real democracy? Direct democracy? The sort of democracy that Switzerland has, okay? The reason that Switzerland has direct democracy is there's 4 traditions. There's German, there's French, there's Italian, and there's Romansh, okay? A small, really ethnically, historically related to the Helvetii, who are the guys who were fighting with Hannibal and Caesar and all that carry on, right? Okay? Why do they have direct democracy? Because they couldn't run the country as a normal spectator democracy because of the cultural differences. It's exactly the same as Ireland. It's a patchwork. German people don't like the French people. French people don't like the Italians, right? And they've all reasons to tell the world why they don't like each other, okay? So they think, okay, the idea of a parliament, do you know who the president or prime minister of Switzerland is? Can you name
Not
them?
unless I ask Professor Google.
Well, exactly. But you know who the prime minister of Germany is?
Sure, Angela.
And France, and Britain, and Ireland, okay? Why? The beautiful thing about Switzerland, nobody knows the prime minister because they're not important, because they devolved all power to the locality, right? And the locality is run by direct democracy, which is that every decision has to be mandated by these citizens' assemblies, which exist in every democracy. This is the way in which Northern Unionists join an all-island political infrastructure. They don't join it by being demanded to go down to Dublin and sit in the Dáil, which freaks them out. Okay? You devolve all power to the locality. You have certain federal taxes, right? And what you do is you run the country like Switzerland on a canton by canton basis.
So federal, really, is that what you're saying?
Hyper-federalism is the way forward for Ireland. You take away the narcissism of leadership, right? Because the narcissism of leadership is driven by the ego, and it has to win its battles, right? And what you do is you say, we are like Switzerland, we're a nation divided by culture, by religion, and by deep history. Like the Swiss were, okay? The Swiss only came together because they were shit scared of the Austrians, of the Habsburgs. That's why Switzerland was created. It was like a refugee country. Like, we can't be with the French, we can't be with the Austrians. We've got this Calvinist thing going on in Genoa, and the Italians are coming up behind us, so we get together by necessity, right? And how do we get together? We say, well, we don't like you because you speak different languages, eat different food, you have different religions, you guys are Catholic, these guys are Protestants, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we all take care of ourselves. So imagine, there's no point ever imagining that the County Council of Newtonards will come down to Dublin willingly playing the game. That ain't going to happen. Imagine the County Council of Carrickfergus or Larne. That ain't going to happen. So what you do is you reimagine Ireland as a federal, hyper-federal country driven and ruled by direct democracy. You take away all the trappings of power, okay? And you totally reimagine the country. And that's the only way it's going to happen. And if it happens...
The political class will never go along with that. How do we make it happen?
By first of all, putting these ideas out there.
Through a citizens' assembly.
By putting these ideas out there in the media, people like you and me, right? By saying, look, this is the way it should go, right? Say, here is an example of a country that has deep ethnic and cultural divisions and manages its situation in which one tradition doesn't dominate the other. It's called Switzerland. Not a bad place, not a bad model, right? Okay. We have the Yugoslavian model, which didn't work, okay, right? We have the Irish, Northern Irish model, which isn't working, okay? So what do? Say, let's have an assembly, a citizens' assembly, which has got a present characteristic and a future characteristic, okay? Equally weighted on decisions. So the present is not weighted, because in a way what we're doing is we are colonizing the future, right? We are colonizing the future.
Loaded terminology, David McWilliams.
It's absolutely true. Well, it's actually not mine. There's an English philosopher called Roman Krasnić, who's actually obviously Croatian or Serbian of descent. But we are colonizing the future in the same way as we were colonized. So if you think the way countries were colonized and the colonization was justified was this, there was a law called terra nullius, that there was nothing there. So when the British went to Australia, they legitimized legally the colonization because there's nobody there, forgetting that there was actually Aboriginal people there for exactly, right? So you colonize, colonialization is all about having no respect for the existing people. That's what it's about, right? In a way, we're colonizing the future because we're having no respect for future generations by getting involved in the narcissism of our own discussions and our own internal debates about they're not like us and we're not like them, right? So we've got to stop all that. And I think, as I said, the hardest thing for this country was to go from a poor, backward, parochial, religiously dominated country to a reasonably wealthy, reasonably advanced, reasonably open, reasonably secular country. Okay, that's a big, big leap, and it happened in 25 years. Okay, 25 years, right? Now, that was the hard bit. The next hard bit is to figure out the next 25 years. And we know that the present political structures won't allow us to, because our politics is built not around avenues, but around roadblocks. Think about it. All our politics, I'm not talking about Northern Ireland, just like the South as well, right? It's built about you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, blah, 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 right? So how do you get around that? You begin having these really innovative suggestions that are not threatening. The great thing about direct democracy is it doesn't threaten people. What threatens people is I'm going to stamp my flag in your back garden. That scares people, right? And Northern Ireland was a state created by that very idea that we're going to stamp our flag in Martina Devlin's back garden, whether you like it or not, okay? And of course, Martina Devlin woke up and said, I'm not having that, right? So you stop and you say, okay, let's reduce it right down to the organic local. And the model is Switzerland. It's not, this is not fantasy. And if Ireland got to a position where nobody knew the name of our president, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing?
David, have you said this to any sitting Taoiseach or...
No, I'm saying it to you now.
I just wonder what the reaction to it is.
No, I mean...
Let's tear down our political structure and have a different one. I mean, I'm gay, but I have no skin in the game as a politician.
But when my dad lost his job because we had this crazy economic policy in the 1980s of following the German currency, nobody asked my dad how he felt about it. But I know how he felt about it. I mean, the reason I'm into economics is probably because that happened to our family.
What happened then? Did he get another job?
He got another job eventually, but hundreds of thousands of Irish men lost their job in the late 70s into the early 80s. Tens of thousands, right? Particularly anybody who worked in manufacturing, such as it was in this country. Because we were run by a bureaucratic class that was so obsessed by economic targets, and they didn't figure out that factories close, and when they close, they don't reopen. That's the interesting thing economists don't get. If you close a factory down, the factory is a living organism. The men who work there, the machines, the banks who lend to them, the customers they have, the skills they have, the trades they have, the crack they have. It was a big man shed, right? You can imagine that, right? And they talk about football and they slag each other, but that was their place of work, and it's precious. And when you close that down because you've got some bullshit notion of exchange rates and interest rates, the sort of stuff that I eventually got interested in, you destroy
the community, don't you?
You destroy it. So we have to be in the business of building, not destroying, and taking what we have and building on it. So in the same way as maybe a local councillor, or you said a politician, might not necessarily embrace these ideas, plenty of Irish people were not mandated about what happened to them. They didn't get a chance to say, oh, can I stick my hand up here and say, oh, I don't think that should happen, right? So my point to you, Martina, is we all live on this island. We all have a stake in this island. Some part of that stake might be red, white, and blue. Some part of that stake might be green, white, and orange, right? But we have a stake. And the stake is to make sure that we manage our affairs in a way that gives future generations an opportunity to live decently. That's all it is.
Brexit fast-forwarded the need for this.
Brexit, of course, fast-forwarded, because Brexit is a silly idea.
Yeah, but it's happening. Whether we think it's it or not, it's happening.
And if I was English, I could articulate an idea in my head as to why this is the right thing to do, right?
Well, right or wrong, it's happening though, Dave.
It's happening, and it will accelerate the evidential difficulties that exist. When I first went to England to work in the city, which was years ago, I'd never really been aware of the class system. But, these are pretty I thought it was, the Brits have got this class system, but it can't be as ridiculous as it actually is, right? When I see, Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson's only voted in because he's posh, right? I mean, a creature like that would never exist in Ireland. You would never.
Posh boys in Ireland, David.
No, we don't. Not really. If you're talking to members of the Socialist Workers' Party, yeah. Mary Lou went to a private school. Yeah, she's posh. That's not a big deal, right? Right. But what I'm saying is, and let's not get dragged into that thing, right?
You wasted.
No, but I'm just saying, in the UK, the UK will have to deal with its own internal inconsistencies, and England will have to deal with what England is and how England defines itself. If you think about the British project started in Laois and Offaly in the Tudor times, okay? That all powerful countries demand of themselves that they project their power as far away from their capital as possible, which is why big, powerful countries colonize other countries. So the British project started in Laois and Offaly under the Tudors. That was the first colony. Then you had the Ulster colonization around the same time, okay? This was an experiment in colonialism. At a certain stage, when our parents were born, that colonial project dominated half of the world. Kind of crazy to think about it. And now, as that project recedes back, it will recede back to the Tudors. It'll go back to where it was in the late or mid-16th century. Seriously. And it will be England, and that's it. And then that England has to figure out its place in the world, and it will. And it might take a huge social revolution there, much greater than anything we're talking about, actually. And Scotland will find its way, because that's what independence does. Because remember we said at the start, having your own bond market makes an adult out of you, right? You got to wake up in the morning and figure out, how do we make a crust? And then we are left with our dilemma, which is a legacy issue. But it's a legacy that's real, that there's 1 million people in the northeast of Ireland who don't know where they want to be. They certainly don't want to be with us. They want to be with Britain, but that Britain is disappearing. Right?
So if we can do one thing to produce better outcomes for everybody.
This citizen assembly.
Nationalist or neither on the island.
Well,
a citizens' assembly and discussing the future.
Discussing the present and the future and taking Switzerland, all political initiatives need heroes, okay? Like all movements need a hero, right? And all movements need a model. And in this case, the heroic model is Switzerland. So you're not saying, listen, I've got this great idea, let's turn ourselves into Serbia, right? Or the great idea, let's turn ourselves into an element of the Ukraine, right? You're saying, I have an idea, we've come this far, amazingly, and over here is this thing called the Swiss model. And we know what that means, because we can feel what Switzerland is. It's peaceful, it's multi-ethnic, it's religiously integrated, okay? But it's got deep.
Try buying a glass of wine there.
But it's only expensive because they've got high wages. If you're Swiss, it's not expensive. It's only expensive if you're a foreigner, right? The reason countries are expensive is because wages are the biggest cost of all societies. It's about 65% of every product, right? Whether it's a pen or a glass or whatever, right? Societies with high wages have high prices. That's the iron law of economics. Societies with low wages have low prices, which is why I prefer to shop in Tesco's in Dundonald than Tesco's in Dunleary, okay? Because it's cheaper, because the wages are lower, right? So we can go up there and, when we're visiting the in-laws, go shopping, right? So, but think about what I'm saying. There is a model. You know the way the Americans talk about this shining city on the hill, right? There is a model. It's direct democracy. It's devolved democracy. It's citizens' assembly. It's not this spectator democracy that we talk about, the every 4 years thumbs up and thumbs down, sending them then, in the Irish context you always hear, send them up to Dublin. That's nonsense thinking, right? I was down in the Hinch during the week, and having a conversation, and it was about sending fellas up to Dublin to get money.
Mm.
And I was thinking, but this is your town. Don't wait for some bureaucrat in Dublin to give you the green light to do something. Do it yourself. And can you imagine the energy that would ignite in local people? Having a say in your own life. It's an amazing thing. Rather than outsourcing your life to a political person and then trying to agitate for favors from that person. It makes no sense. Sorry, I'm getting agitated now.
We have to leave it there. We're out of time. It's been such an imaginative, thought-provoking conversation, David. Thank you for sharing your ideas.
Not at all. Not at all. I'll see you in Tesco's and Dundonald before you know it.
Absolutely. Or
that'll be a first for you.
Thank you. That was David McWilliams.
Cheers, Martina. Take care.
My pleasure.
Bye.